Hi everyone, and welcome to this McGraw-Hill Education webinar, ALEKS Math Skill Building Using Adaptive Differentiated Learning. My name is Kathy Chang, and I'm an implementation specialist with ALEKS, and I will be the webinar moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being presented in listen-only mode, which means you will be able to hear the presenters, but they won't be able to hear you. Don't worry though, this doesn't mean you can't participate. We will be launching a couple of interactive polling questions during the webinar, and we of course want to hear any questions you may have, so just type those in the questions panel on your toolbar at any time. If you do not see your toolbar, you may need to click on the little orange arrow to expand this. Joining us today is Emily DiGiovanna, one of our best implementation specialists here at ALEKS. As a former ALEKS user herself, she has firsthand experience on how the adaptive power of ALEKS can be used to truly individualize and differentiate learning. So without further ado, take it away, Emily.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you just joining us, my name is Emily, and I am an implementation specialist here at ALEKS, like Kathy said. And I'm going to be introducing ALEKS to you and explaining how ALEKS adapts to students to create individualized learning paths for each of them, allowing them to succeed on standardized tests and beyond. So I'm actually going to jump over real quick to the ALEKS website for just a moment. This is a place where you can come to read all about ALEKS, how ALEKS works, and the research behind it. You can even try out a free trial from a student or a teacher's perspective. And since ALEKS is entirely web-based, all you'll need to access ALEKS is a computer or tablet with an internet connection. And this website is also where students and teachers are going to log in to access ALEKS. So I'm going to jump back to the agenda for today. So I'm going to begin the webinar with a brief explanation of how ALEKS works for students. But then I'm going to take a closer look at some different components of ALEKS and how they're adaptive. So I'll then get into a few of our many tools and reports that support teachers who use ALEKS with their students. And we'll even have time to hear from an ALEKS teacher. We've got James Murray, who is joining us from Waukesha STEM Academy. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And also Kathy, my colleague, she's on the line monitoring that question box. So we may have time to answer a few, so feel free to send any over as they come up. And we're going to actually get things started here with a quick poll just to gauge the audience familiarity with ALEKS. So Kathy can go ahead and launch this poll. And what we're going to ask you guys is if you've ever watched an ALEKS demo. So it can, in person, online, it doesn't matter. Just let us know if you've seen ALEKS, maybe at a trade show booth or one of our online demos. We'll give you another few seconds to submit your answer, and then we can take a look at some of the results. All right, so it looks like most of us haven't seen an ALEKS demo before. It's about a 35-65 split, so that's great. I am going to be beginning with a sort of a crash course in ALEKS to make sure that everyone does have a good understanding. So I'll move on to the next slide here. All right. So what essentially ALEKS does is it starts off each student with an initial assessment that is going to be specific to their course. Now this initial assessment is not predetermined. Rather the questions adapt to the student to find out precisely which skills in the course the student knows and which skills they don't know, but most importantly which skills each student is ready to learn. And then after that initial assessment, the student is going to be taken to a pie chart that represents visually where they're at in the course. So students will use this pie chart to navigate their course. They'll be able to click on their ready-to-learn topics to practice them in the learning mode. Now in the learning mode, students will practice these ready-to-learn topics, and they'll get guidance from feedback and explanations. And after they demonstrate sufficient mastery of a topic in the learning mode, the topic gets filled in on their pie chart, and the student can go back to the pie and pick a different topic. So students will continue to click on ready-to-learn topics and add them to their pie. And after about 20 topics are added, ALEKS is going to give the student a progress assessment. Now these progress assessments check for retention of those recently learned topics, and if the student hasn't fully mastered any of those topics, they'll go back into the pie chart for the student to review. So after a progress assessment, the student will then be brought back to their pie chart, where they'll continue clicking on topics to practice in the learning mode. So ALEKS is really a cycle of learning and periodic assessment, and the cycle allows ALEKS to constantly monitor the student and present them with the review material the student needs to remediate those learning gaps and really learn the content of the course. Now I know that's kind of a lot of information, but the most important things I want you to remember right now are that ALEKS begins each student with an initial assessment that adapts to their knowledge, then has them work on ready-to-learn topics in the learning mode, and also that ALEKS will automatically give these periodic progress assessments. All right, now a lot of learning systems describe themselves as adaptive. So I want to explain to you guys what that really means in ALEKS. ALEKS is going to be adapting content to the knowledge level of the student through all stages of this cycle of learning and assessment. So I'm going to be going through three main components of ALEKS that are adaptive. We'll take a look at the initial assessment and also learning mode and progress assessments. Now to demonstrate the initial assessment, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a simulation. And I'm going to pretend that I've got two students, student A and student B, who are both pre-algebra students. So today they're both going to be taking their pre-algebra initial assessment. Now I'm going to start off by pretending to be student A, who's got some pretty significant skill gaps. And later on I'll pretend to be student B, who we're going to pretend is more or less a student working at grade level. Now remember, this initial assessment uses adaptive questioning, which in essence means that the next question asked is determined based on how the student answered the previous questions. So I'm going to take this first initial assessment here as student A, and then I'll take another assessment as student B, so that we can demonstrate how these different paths, based on the student's unique knowledge, how those different paths lead to completely different assessments. So let's get started here with student A's assessment. So it's going to begin with a question pulled from somewhere in the pre-algebra curriculum, and we have no way of knowing what the next question is going to be, because that's going to be chosen based on how student A answers this question. Now before I get started on this assessment, I'd like to bring your attention to this solve button so that I can promptly ask you to ignore it. This solve button is not available in an actual student assessment. This is something that I have so that I can demonstrate correct answers without doing math in front of math teachers. So just remember, Emily will be using the solve button, but your students won't have a solve button. So only Emily gets the solve button. All right, so on these assessments, the students should go ahead and answer any questions that they know how to do. So remember, student A has some skill gaps. So I'm going to have him answer the first few questions incorrectly. I'm actually going to use my solve button and change the answer so that we know it's not correct. And we can see that I'm brought to the next question, and I'm not given any feedback. Now, students will never be told in these assessments whether they answered right or wrong, because they're assessments, they're not tests. I'm just moved along to the next question, and I'll go ahead and get another one incorrect. Now, another thing I'd like you to notice is this button that says, I haven't learned this yet. This is for students to click on if they ever come across a topic that they haven't learned, so that they don't need to frustrate themselves by trying to work through problems that they've never been exposed to. If a student clicks this button, again, they're moved along to the next question. They're not going to be given any sort of feedback. But ALEKS is using this information and continuing to adapt. So I may answer some questions confidently, incorrectly, as student A, my student with skill gaps. But student A may at some point need to use this button from time to time if he does encounter problems that he has no idea how to solve. All right, so after several incorrect answers, we start to notice that these questions aren't really getting any more advanced. They actually seem to be getting a little bit more basic because student A clearly has some knowledge gaps. So what this assessment's doing is it's backpedaling through the curriculum to better pinpoint where my gaps are. Now for this webinar, I'm not going to be taking the whole initial assessment. I just wanted to get far enough so that you can see the types of questions and remember the types of questions that student A is being asked. So now I'm going to switch over and pretend to be student B. So I'm in a different student account taking my pre-algebra initial assessment. But since student B is more or less at grade level, I'm going to be getting most of these answers correct. So I'll go ahead and use that solve button. Remember, students don't have this. So we can see what happens for a student who is more comfortable with the content. Now, you may have begun to pick up that most of these assessment questions are free response. So ALEKS isn't having me select A, B, C, or D. I'm actually working out problems and inputting their answers. So, of course, right now I'm cheating a little bit with this solve button, but actual students are going to need to use these answer input tools. So it could be something as simple as this exponent with the superscript, but it might be something more sophisticated like using virtual tools to actually graph a line in the plane. So now that I've started to answer several questions correct, we can see that they've become more advanced. So the assessment is pushing me further into the curriculum as student B than it did when I was student A because it wants to see how far student B has knowledge. So remember, we can't ever predict which questions this initial assessment is going to ask a student. It's always going to adapt to their level so that it can meet them there. And this ensures that when students begin working in the learning mode, they're never going to get bored by content that's too easy for them or frustrated by content that's out of their reach. So right from the beginning with this initial assessment, ALEKS adapts its questioning to pinpoint the specific skills that each student needs to be working on. All right, I'm going to take a minute and check in with Kathy to see if any questions have come through.
Yes. Hi, Emily. So one question did come through, and someone is wondering if the initial assessment is timed.
Oh, good question. No, the initial assessment isn't timed. Students can take as long as they need. So it's typically about 25 questions. So if I'm at question number 9, let's say the bell rings and I need to go to lunch, I can click exit, and when I log in later, I'll be brought back to question number 9. So the assessment is always going to save a student's progress. Good question. All right, so I won't be completing either of these assessments, but when an actual student does complete theirs, they're going to be brought to their own pie chart. Now, this pie chart is unique to them, so I'm going to start off by pulling up a pie chart for a student who had performed like student A, our skill gaps student. So this pie chart is a visual representation of the course. We can see that this pre-algebra pie chart is divided into 7 different slices, each slice representing a different section of the course. Now looking closer at one particular slice, we can see that there's a dark portion and a light portion. So the dark portion will represent topics the student currently knows, and the light portion represents topics they will learn. So student A, our skill gap student, was able to show mastery of some of the course's topics on his initial assessment. And we can see that he's given credit for 23 of the 300 or so topics in pre-algebra. Now to move into the learning mode, he'll decide which pie slice he'd like to work on, and only his ready-to-learn topics will be available to click on. So if we take this red slice, for example, we can see some of his ready-to-learn topics are finding the percentage of a grid that is shaded and constructing a line plot. So he'll be able to work on these skills that he wasn't able to show mastery of on his assessment. Now I'm going to jump over to a pie chart for another student. And this pie chart, the student performed like student B, our student who's on grade level. So he came in with 231 of the topics already mastered. You can see that it's the same pre-algebra pie chart. It's just got a lot more topics filled in. So if we come over here to this red slice, we can see that student B's ready-to-learn topics are quite a bit different than student A's. So student B, he's ready to learn finding unit rates, converting between compound units, finding percentage increase or decrease, etc. So generally more advanced topics. So you can see how this difference in ready-to-learn topics allows ALEKS to really meet each student at their own unique level. So next I'd like to get a little more into ALEKS's learning mode. So remember, students use the pie to access learning mode. They decide which slice they'd like to work on and click on any of the ready-to-learn topics. So I'll go ahead and choose a topic from here. I'm going to go with graphing a linear inequality in the plane. And once a student clicks a topic, they're going to move into the learning mode where they'll see a practice problem for that topic. Now, if they want to answer the problem, they can go ahead and input their answer and click Next. Got some answer input tools. I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit and use my Solve button. But one thing that I remember about learning inequalities is that I would always forget to do the shading. So student B, even though he's a good student, he's not perfect. So we're going to pretend that he forgot to shade. But he's going to go ahead and input his answer. And we can see that he's given immediate feedback. So student B is told the solution set for this problem is a region of the plane. So it's giving him specific feedback. So this free response environment in ALEKS is really cool because not only does it ensure that the students aren't losing that functionality associated with actually using a pencil and paper, but it also allows ALEKS to give this intelligent feedback. So if necessary, ALEKS might remind a student to use the proper units or simplify, basically call out any specific components of their answer. All right, but anyway, we can see that he's answered incorrectly. So if he'd like, he could go ahead and fix his answer and resubmit, but maybe he's stuck. And if that's the case, he's got this Explain button to help him out. So clicking Explain is going to offer the student a step-by-step tutorial walking him through how to solve this problem. So this Explain button is always going to be available to the students as they work in the learning mode. So I could have gotten the explanation right off the bat. Some students like to always try a problem first and then click Explain. But regardless of how they choose to access it, there's lots of great resources on this Explain page. So students can click hyperlinked words. These will link to the ALEKS dictionary. They can also choose to get more detail on specific concepts. And if any of you listening has got Spanish-speaking students, you can toggle over to Spanish up here, and that's going to translate the explanation. It'll translate the dictionary, all the questions and answers. Basically, the whole ALEKS interface will get translated into authentic Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with English for the rest of the webinar. And what I'm going to do now is click Practice and demonstrate some correct answers in the learning mode. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, use my handy Solve button. And we can see that the student gets positive immediate feedback. So practice again. And after several correct answers, ALEKS will at some point tell the student that they seem to have learned the question. So I'll go ahead here, and one more should do it. There it is. So ALEKS tells me, very good, you seem to have learned the question. I can click Done and go back to my pie chart, which has now been updated with my progress. All right, so that's sort of a little bit about how a student would use this pie to navigate the learning mode and all the sorts of resources available in the learning mode to help students learn that topic. All right, I'm going to check in with Kathy again to see if any questions have come in.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
So we did have a couple of questions come in. So the first one is, can students work in any area of the pie chart?
Sure. So a student will be able to work on any pie slice that they have ready-to-learn topics in. So student B, he's filled in a lot of his pie, but we can see some of these slices have some light portion. And if there's a gray arrow next to the name of the slice, that means that they're ready to learn topics in that slice. If the student doesn't have as much of the course mastered, they might not have access to all of the topics. They may need to learn prerequisite topics in other pie slices before unlocking ready-to-learn topics for a particular slice. It's a good question.
Yeah, it was a good question. Another question did come in, and a couple of people are wondering if ALEKS can be aligned or correlated to a textbook so that students can see corresponding explanations from a textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of our ALEKS courses have textbook integration capabilities. So what this essentially does is you select your textbook, and if you'd like, you can actually even reorganize the content to have students access the ALEKS topics in the order that the textbook would cover those topics. Or you could also choose to just have the textbook referenced. And if you choose this, then when students click on the Explain button for a particular topic, any parallel material available in the textbook will come up as sort of an additional resource in addition to that explanation. All right. Any other questions, or is that it for now?
I think we're good for now.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into my slides just for a moment to do a little discussion on these progress assessments. So remember, these are given periodically to students to check in and see how they're retaining the topics that they practice in the learning mode. Now, if students can't demonstrate mastery of a topic on a progress assessment, the topic is going to go back into that student's pie for them to practice. So these progress assessments seamlessly ensure that students are reviewing skills that they haven't fully mastered the first time they learned them. Now, ALEKS will give these progress assessments automatically to students after about 20 topics learned and at least 5 hours spent in the learning mode. However, students might be all over the map in terms of their learning rates, so a progress assessment can also be given after 10 hours spent in the learning mode, regardless of how many topics a student has added. So these triggers are also adapting to each student's activity in ALEKS. In these progress assessments, they'll use that same adaptive questioning that we witnessed in the initial assessment. The main difference is that the questions are going to focus on topics recently learned in the learning mode. Because it's adaptive, though, students might be assessed on topics they haven't added, but they're ready to learn. So this can be really advantageous for students. For some students using ALEKS, it is their primary math curriculum. But for many, it is going to supplement other forms of math instruction. So one outcome of these progress assessments is that students might get credit in their pie charts for knowledge that they could have obtained outside ALEKS. So these pies will adjust to account for the knowledge that progress assessments can uncover. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about some of the teacher resources available in ALEKS. And to kick this off, we're going to do another quick poll question, just so I can learn a little bit more about you all, our wonderful audience, to see the types of students that you primarily work with. So Kathy can go ahead and launch our second poll question, and we'll give you all a few moments to answer here. So we'd like to know primarily what types of students you work with. You can check more than one option, so if you work with a variety of student groups, definitely let us know. All right, so a pretty good mix. A lot of high school teachers, it looks like. All right, middle school is creeping up. All right, so it looks like we've got mostly high school, kind of trickling down to elementary, and also a significant amount of intervention. So that's great. Just nice to have a good understanding of who's watching, and kind of segue nicely into this, this teacher side. All right. So when we look at the student side of ALEKS, it's easy to see how this differentiated learning is advantageous for students. What I know can sometimes be difficult, though, is incorporating a regular class routine or class instruction in a way that's going to complement the student's individual work in ALEKS. So ALEKS provides teachers with tools and reports to support the students' work in ALEKS in several different settings. So I'll go through 3 different scenarios here, a class-wide lesson, one-on-one time with a student, and group work to highlight some ALEKS features that could support each scenario. So I'm going to jump back out of PowerPoint and actually into my ALEKS teacher account. And I've got the dashboard up for my 6th period pre-algebra class. So I'm going to pretend that I've got about 20 minutes left in my class. So I'm pretending to be a teacher now. I know I was a student earlier, but now I'm a teacher. And I've got about 20 minutes left in class, and I want to do a quick lesson that's going to benefit most of the class. So right here on my dashboard, I can see a tile for top 5 ready-to-learn topics. So right off the bat, I could use this as a suggestion for a potential lesson topic. But I can also click here and see all ready-to-learn topics. And clicking that button is going to bring me to the ALEKS Pie report for my class. Now this Pie report is just one of many great reports available in ALEKS. You can sort of think of it as a report that shows you the overall health of your class. So it gives you here the average Pie mastery of all students in the class, and then breaks it down by slice to show you each topic in the Pie slice in which students have mastered, have not mastered, or are ready to learn that topic. So this report will show me what percentage of my class is ready to learn any topic in the course. But going back to that main dashboard, I can always get this quick, immediate list of topics that might be good to discuss. All right, so the next scenario I want to discuss is maybe if you've got some one-on-one time to work with a student. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Time and Topic report, which is another great report. And this Time and Topic report gives you a lot of information, not only about how much time students are spending in ALEKS, but also how they spend their time. So if I scroll down, I can see all my students enrolled in this class. I can see their total time in ALEKS and when they've last logged in, and their total time for the date range. But I can also see for each day that they logged into ALEKS, I can see how many minutes they spent and the number of topics mastered out of the total number attempted. So if I take a look at Jane here, I can see that on Friday, 1 out of 4 tells me that she attempted 4 different topics, but she was only able to master 1. So she only actually got to the Done button for 1 of those topics. So I can actually click her name here. And if I'd like, I can click 4 topics to see a list of all the topics that Jane attempted that day. So the topic with the star she was able to master, but all these other topics, something happened. She wasn't able to master them. So if I want a little bit more detail, I can click the date, and this is going to generate a learning sequence log for Jane. So I can actually see timestamped activity. So I'll see when she clicked this topic. So she clicked this topic from her pie chart, acute, obtuse, and right triangles. She got the first question wrong, and then she got another one wrong, and then she clicked explain. And then she seemed to have understood it because she started getting them correct, and then she added the topic to her pie. So she's done. But if I come down here, I can see that she attempted some of these other topics, and she just got this one wrong and then gave up and tried another topic. So she clicked absolute value of a number, got that question wrong, gave up and tried another topic. So looks like in this case, maybe I would want to encourage her to use that explain button and actually walk through the steps of the explanation before giving up immediately. And one of my favorite things about this report is that you can actually click the result and it will bring up the question that the student was working on. You can see the correct answer and the student's incorrect answer. All right, so that is the learning sequence log in our time and topic report. I'm going to go ahead and go over one last scenario that you may be experiencing in your class, and that is group or rotational work. So I'm going to jump back to the class pie report that we took a look at. And we can see, if we view all topics, that we can look and see which percentages of students are ready to learn a specific topic. But we can also actually see which students fall into that percentage. So maybe I've got a great worksheet on estimating a quotient. I can see that in my class right now, 3 students, Abraham, Harry, and George, are all ready to learn about estimating a quotient. So I can maybe group them together to work on this topic in their pies or practice the worksheet. I could even send them a message right from this report. All right, so this is just sort of a small taste of what ALEKS has to offer students and teachers. One thing I would encourage you all to do is open up a free trial on our ALEKS website. From a free trial, you can experience ALEKS as a student in any of our courses. And the teacher free trial is going to be populated with sample data, so you can really get a feel for what sorts of ways ALEKS could help your math situation. All right, so I'm sure by now that some of you are tired of hearing me talk, which is why I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker, James Murray, who is a principal at Waukesha STEM Academy. A self-described pizza lover, he also happens to be a big advocate of personalized and blended learning. James, we're so happy that you took time out of your day to share your ALEKS experience with us. So at this point, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, thank you. Am I live?
You are live. We can hear you great.
The audio is working, okay.
It's working great.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And as you said, yeah, I'm a pretty big advocate of ALEKS, and I've used it for quite a while. And then it really helped us transition. I think it's more personalized, and even before that, the proficiency-based learning models that we sort of subscribe to now. And it really started off as just a we're in 2 sites, a K-5 and a 6-8 site. And we started off initially piloting with a 3rd through 8th grade. We just went full blast and just wanted to see how it worked. And then we sort of worked out some of the bugs and found the strengths and, you know, sort of baptism by fire. But really pulled out the benefits of the program. And I think it didn't happen overnight, but I definitely think it opened up teachers' eyes to a different way to facilitate math rather than to just teach math. Whether that, you know, was the low readiness of a 3rd grader and all the way up through high school readinesses of our 8th grade students and 7th grade students. And so I think you always we always looked at it as personally, when I was introing it, I was actually a teacher in 5th grade. And so, you know, my biggest struggle was obviously differentiating for kiddos that were in 5th grade, but we're at a 2nd grade level or a 3rd grade level, and you know, all the way up to a 7th or 8th or even pre-algebra, algebra level, and it's, you know, you go crazy trying to differentiate that much within a 60-minute math class. And so I wanted to really try something different, and we were fortunate enough to have some devices that we could play around with and really introduce ALEKS into our environment. And so we, you know, we really looked at it, really following the model and prescribed to using the pre-assessments to really figure out where student skills were, along with you know, other pieces of data like map data, and we have a state standardized test and other things. And so we really looked at ALEKS as a supplement, but never to supplant, because what we didn't want, and parents' biggest concern was, well, you're just going to have students sitting on a computer all day, or, you know, that's going to become their teacher or whatever have you. And so we were always very careful and cautious to not let that become our model. But to really let it support what we were doing and to really let it be prescriptive for what we knew we needed to do. And so with that being said, it really helped us develop learner profiles and just really the proficiency based as far as understanding exactly where students were at and what we needed to do to differentiate or launch different mini lessons, or, just to support them. And if you had students that were working at their own pace, sometimes you're going to have your group of independent students that's their preferred modality of learning. And then you build in some application pieces and some other support systems for them to really demonstrate mastery of learning before they move on, or before they demonstrate proficiency. And so it's a great tool. It really helped us support our needs, both on the I guess anywhere from the 1st percentile to the 99th percentile, and definitely helped move kids, our students that were at grade level, above and beyond that too. And so the first questions that we were getting addressed, we were having to address were, well, does it work? And this is great, but is the data supported? And that word's a little cliche at times, but so we went through a few years of it, and we sort of used a couple things. We used ALEKS as a piece of data, but it was a little, people will say, well, yeah, you're using the program as evidence of it working, and so that doesn't really work. That's like using the word you're defining in the definition of the word. And so we sort of had to battle that, and we said, well, okay, then we'll use something similar, and we'll use, a map test for data. And so we really looked at setting benchmarks and really looking at, was this program really supporting what our goals were, and was it really going to be something that fit our needs as we moved forward? Because we were targeting, I think, at that point, if we were using it from 3rd to 8th, it was roughly 500 or more students at that time that we launched with, so it's a pretty good pilot size group. And so we basically took 3 subgroups of, at that time, we're multi-age now, but at that time it was 5th grade students, 3 groups of roughly 28, and just really looked at the data. And if, I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is familiar with MAP, or using MAP testing, or other sources or benchmarks, or tests like that. And we did it in a fall, winter, and spring fashion, always with goal setting and things like that. And it was pretty cool because when we took the pre-tests in our fall, to get our benchmarks and everything else, by winter, the first group, 61% had already hit their goals. The second group, a little bit over half, and the third group, a little bit over half, hit their goals. And then by the end of the year, using MAP again and using ALEKS as really what we found was a real staple in the math diet, along with some direct instruction, some Khan Academy, and some other stuff. But ALEKS, I would say, was probably 70% of the math that was being supported in the class. So with that being said, out of those 3 groups, then by the end of the year, the first group, which was probably our lowest readiness, I would say they had about 74% of that group hit their RIT goals in MAP. The second group, 93% hit them, all but 2 students, I'm sorry. And then in the third group, 97% of our students hit their targets. That was the first year that we piloted the program, and so we stepped back and said, you know what, this isn't just by chance that this is happening. And I had taught for 10 or 11 years at that point, and I had never, never seen those kind of results. And so I was a bit ashamed that I couldn't do that on my own, but we really took it in stride and said, this is a really great product. And so whenever I would speak to parents or teachers, or even my administrator at the time, or curriculum and instruction folks, or even our board, would say, well, yeah, this program, and you're going to buy it, and you want it for X amount of kids, and how can you prove that it really works, and that it's not just a flash in the pan? And so we would film it, we would show the board, we'd show parents, we would show other students, really, and just have them see what the students were experiencing and what their reactions were and why they favored it. And they were very optimistic. It wasn't, I can tell you, it wasn't for 100% of the students. Some students would, they'd say, this isn't for me, and you'd really work with them, and you could meet them halfway and still get success out of it. And then there's the majority of students we put on it just flourished. And as I transitioned from an elementary role to a middle school, our 6, 7, 8 campus, I did more curriculum and instruction, more coordinator roles at the high school, and more just district-wide stuff. We really started utilizing it for more RTI and more, intervention-based interactions with students at not even at an intervention time. We really looked at RTI models in Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and I think we were putting so much emphasis on Tier 2 and Tier 3 at the time that we really were taking our main goal, which was success, getting learning right the first time. We really were not as focused on that as we should have been, and so we really started using ALEKS to target the needs specifically of every single student in every single class during the class, instead of saying, oh, you're falling behind, intervention should really help. That's not to say we eliminated intervention by any means. We still used ALEKS a lot with that RTI program in our intervention blocks, but I really think by targeting students' needs within their regular math time, you could have 20 or 2 or 200 students sitting next to each other working on ALEKS, and there's very little recognition between 2 students sitting next to each other of what course they're in. A lot of times you have math groups that get pulled out, or it's the quote-unquote special ed group, or the low, the middle, the high, and there's a lot of stigma attached to that, and I don't think a lot of students didn't look for that. They didn't recognize that, and they sure as heck didn't feel that. They were happy to see success, and it got to the point where we sort of adhered to the 15%, 85% rule. So if you would take your pre-assessments and they scored at a 15% or lower, or typically lower, we really looked at possibly bumping them down. And students didn't really get offended. They weren't upset. They might have been a tad bit frustrated at first, but as soon as they saw success and the readability was a bit easier, the scaffolding was a bit stronger for them, and they really started to see their pie start to populate and fill up, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I can do this. And I think since each of the courses are sort of nested in the next one, meaning you're going to still have second grade skills going into a third grade course, or fifth grade going into one of the middle school level ones, or you're still going to have a lot of this very similar skills, and so they started recognizing those as they transitioned back up to their current grade level, which really was our goal, is to get them on grade level. So we really love that. I think that was one of the biggest things, was it just took away that self-confidence piece, which was lacking. It really helped build that back up again. And that was something that I took a while for teachers to understand. Well, you can't put them back in a lower level, or if they're in third grade, they need to do third grade work. And I think it took a matter of less than 2 months for teachers to really start recognizing that without the self-esteem, there would be no success. And once the esteem came, the success came, and then they got back to grade level and then beyond, and then the teachers sat back and said, wow, this kid's not so crazy. He was sort of making sense before. So we found a lot of benefit and a lot of, I don't even want to say hope, I would just say guidance and vision from that, which transitioned our math from not a curriculum but more to a program. As we continue to build, I'd say we move forward with ALEKS, and we definitely have looked at other programs, but I think ALEKS has definitely trumped anything based on the benchmarks, the assessments, the continuous, sort of formative assessments, and then it's almost like the badging system where the kids can constantly see where they're at. There's a sense of pride and a sense of achievement in that, and I'm not so sure that a lot of our kiddos are familiar with Trivial Pursuit, but I think when parents see that too, they like to see that too, and they like to understand and see that their son or daughter are getting topics covered and everything else. And then to the point also where if you really look at it, and I think you spoke to this earlier, but just the time on topic and things like that, if you've got students who you've given them, maybe you've carved out a half hour of math time or some other time, and you see, students maybe in 30 minutes have 1 topic complete or 2 attempted and 0 complete, and you sort of have that critical conversation, which is sometimes a soft conversation. You really need to figure out the student, but if you know it's a student that's capable and you see some red flags going up, it's really easy to pull out that data, and that's hard data as well. As far as it's not a percentage of you got a 90 on a test. It's a percentage of, what, in 30 minutes you tried 2 topics and got none right, and I know you can do them. What's going on? So, sometimes it's a good support system in that as well. So, There's a lot. There's really a lot that I would say we benefited from, both digitally by using it, and then I think our mental models definitely have shifted, and so we're pretty grateful from that. We've definitely come a long way. We've been using ALEKS, I would think this is our 4th year, and I definitely don't see us discontinuing the use. And even so far as we were sort of used as the sort of the poster child for ALEKS in our district, and so I would work with the high schools as a coordinator, and initially started to use it as an intervention tool for freshmen and sophomores that were scoring underneath a 230 or 240 RIT, for not quite algebra readiness. Freshmen are going to struggle. Sophomores, if you're not there, you're really going to struggle. And so we looked at some of the RTI courses, and I had to have the same conversations with them that if you're trying to cram algebra down these kids' throats, they're not going to succeed. They're going to become frustrated. They're going to give up. They're not going to want to try for you. They're going to drop out of your math, and they're going to need to take credit recovery in summer. You finished the story, but so I started to show them how we're using it, and they came over to see it, and they just said, you know what, it's something we could give a try. And all of a sudden, the numbers started turning around. They saw students getting out of the intervention because they were getting back up to grade level. And to me, it was a means to an end, because I kept asking them, well, what if you could use this for extension, or what if you could use this for at-grade level kids, or what if this could become a part of your math workshop model? And when you say math workshop in high school, sometimes the the heads go through the roof. But I think a couple of them tried it and they loved it, and they can't go back either. Whether it be for extension students, and they're afraid to have kids move too far ahead, and now they've really got a system to help them, where they may not have had a knowledge base at the time or the support to do so before. And so it's really blown the gates open, I think, for anywhere from 2nd grade to 12th grade and beyond. Even in our elementary campus, we've got multi-age, and so we had students in kinder or first, believe it or not, who were getting into 3rd grade ALEKS courses as we started to do proficiency-based math, and so it's been beneficial, to say the least. I really support it and believe in it, and obviously as I've moved into the role as a principal, it's definitely something I continue to allocate funding for, and don't see that stopping anytime soon. Even if we have to fight for the dollars, we always leave them on the side for ALEKS. So definitely a big fan. So.
All right, James, thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
That was great to hear from you. I think everyone really appreciated hearing from an actual ALEKS teacher. We do have 1 or 2 questions. Do you mind answering? Do you have another minute? You could stay with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, got some burning questions. Somebody wants to know what state your school is located in, so I thought I'd let you represent a little bit.
Yeah, we're in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is maybe 20-25 miles west of Milwaukee. Not everybody knows Waukesha, but I know they know Milwaukee.
All right, I must have mispronounced that. All right, so he's in Wisconsin. And then another question was if you could just give maybe one example of how ALEKS was blended with direct instruction.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we had earlier there was a great question, I believe, that came through about aligning curriculum with ALEKS, and that's something that we struggled with, not as far as getting it done, but as far as a mindset of, did we want to do that versus did you really want ALEKS to be personalized so students could choose their own topics? And so we had a conversation about that, I would say almost weekly, as I got into the C&I role and really started overseeing curriculum for both campuses, because teachers had great points on both ends, and they would say, well, I'm using, I think in middle school we had CMP2, so connected math out of Michigan State, and they aligned it, so by the end of October, if they were done with a certain book, they wanted those topics in ALEKS to be done. And as they moved on, they aligned it with the books. And so what they would do is they would launch mini lessons out of the texts, and then students would have practice time or application time on ALEKS. They could use the book for more inquiry-based. There might be a certain amount of time where students would come in, and the first 20 minutes would be ALEKS. And if students had a math teacher at that time who put more parameters on it, then she would directly or he would directly reflect with the students on those topics, go through some visual aids, some visual application, have students bring it to life. That was the biggest thing that we wanted to do, was leave it at, or I'm sorry, not just leave it at ALEKS, but bring it beyond into the application piece. And then we had other teachers who felt, you know, I've got students in, man, we had students coming in 6th grade that were already in Algebra 1. And so they were teaching these students out of, we were using the Pearson book or another book at that time, but the students were moving much, much faster than the teacher was teaching the course. And to those sections, it didn't make sense to align it because the kids were at so many different places that it was holding kids back. And so what we would do for that would be the students would still, they would still pre-assess out of the content or the topics, the learning targets, Common Core that the teacher was doing, and then they'd be able to move on their own pace. But what we didn't want was such a gap that, you know, they had learned something in ALEKS 5 months ago, and all of a sudden they have to retest on it in the book. And so we try to make it more application-based for them. So if they finished a slice, they would present to the class. They could pick 2 or 3 topics and present to the class a real-life application. They would almost teach a lesson similar to what a teacher would teach with questions, Q&A, interactive, and things like that. And so it was really cool, and then they had to tie it to real life. So they'd have to go out and find either somebody that was in that field or somebody that was that would use that type of math in real life, and they'd really have to come back and demonstrate that for the class. And so we looked at it a bunch of different ways. The other thing we loved is when, I think 2 years ago maybe, or 3 years ago, when you could start to add links to, I think, Khan Academy and some other stuff like that. So on top of blending it with textbooks and direct instruction, we could now also blend it with Khan or some other resources. And so we started building ALEKS into our, you know, just a daily rotation. It almost became like a must-do, can-do in a workshop, like a literacy workshop, where you know, it was one of 4 or 5 modalities, and still, again, 70% or so, I would say, stuck to ALEKS as their main learning modality, with support from direct instruction, the book, Khan, CK12, SAS, a lot of other stuff that's, you know, open ed resource. So it's really evolved, and again, I think that's what really helped us change our mindset from you're a 6th grade math teacher, I'm a 7th, and he's an 8th, to I'm a math teacher, and I'm going to have students all over the map. We're still going to look at RIT ranges and scores and, you know, ALEKS assessments, but we're going to really be flexibly grouping across the whole school. And so, you know, eliminating grade levels this year and going proficiency-based, I really don't know that would have happened without ALEKS and the blend ed model, and really just personalizing it through ALEKS. So it's definitely opened a lot of doors.
Okay, thank you so much again, James, for taking time out of your day to join us.
Sure.
We want to make sure we end the webinar on time, so thank you so much, everybody, for joining today's webinar. We will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording, and I'm also going to share a link to the ALEKS Training Center in the chat box right now to everybody. And I encourage everyone to visit the Training Center and check out some of the valuable resources we have available for you, including some pre-recorded tutorials and PDFs. Also, as you exit the webinar today, a survey will open, and we would appreciate your feedback to help us improve and plan future webinars. If we did not get to your questions today, we will follow up with you individually. And if you have any additional questions, please email webinars@mheducation.com. That email address is now on your screen. And thanks again for attending.